Welcome to The Explainer. For over 20 years now, we've been hearing about the global war on terror. But today, we're going to dig into how that war didn't just happen in South Asia. It completely rewired the entire region from the inside out. So, we're diving into this really fascinating security studies thesis from 2015, and it poses a pretty gutsy question. What if the war on terror didn't actually make South Asia safer? What if, and this is the core argument, it actually left the whole region more vulnerable? It's a huge claim, so let's unpack it. Okay, so right after 9/11, all eyes were on Afghanistan, right? But the shockwaves, well, they spread across the whole neighborhood in ways that, frankly, nobody really saw coming. To understand how that happened, the thesis we're looking at gives us this really specific tool, this analytical lens, to see the problem more clearly. All right, first things first. We need to get our heads around the main framework the thesis uses. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's called regional security complex theory. But the core idea is actually pretty simple. It's all about how problems, especially security problems, tend to spill over the fence to the neighbors. So this theory, RSCT for short, it basically flips the script on how we usually think about global security. We tend to focus on big superpowers and global threats. But RSCT argues that for most countries, your biggest headaches, your most immediate dangers, they're coming from what's happening literally right next door. The key takeaway is that security is, first and foremost, a local issue. And here's the breakdown. A threat pops up in one country, right? It almost never stays put. It spills across the border, and suddenly the security of one nation is tangled up with its neighbors, whether they want it to be or not. And this tangled web is what the theory calls a security complex. Think of it like a regional bubble where everybody's fate is intertwined. It's a super simple but really powerful concept that explains why what happens in one country rarely stays in one country. Okay, so keeping that neighborhood theory in mind, let's apply it. What exactly changed in South Asia's security puzzle after 9/11? This is where it gets really interesting. The thesis argues that the war on terror didn't just add a new threat, it changed the very nature of conflict in the region. Before, the main game in town was state versus state, the classic rivalry between India and Pakistan over land. But after 9/11, that shifted. A totally new kind of conflict took center stage, one fought inside these countries. It was a battle of ideas, of ideology, fueled by extremism in groups that weren't even governments. And this isn't just a theory, there's data to back it up. The thesis pulls numbers from the Heidelberg Institute, and look at this. Between 2002 and 2014, conflicts driven by ideology and clashes over how society should be run, well, they outnumbered the old-school territory disputes by more than 2-1. The numbers don't lie. They paint a really clear picture of a massive shift. The real battlefield wasn't a borderline anymore. It was society itself. Data and charts tell one part of the story. But what did this actually feel like for the people on the ground living through this shift? Well, this is a great part of the thesis. It zooms in on a really unique source, a series of blog posts from a political blogger in Bangladesh. And this gives us such a raw, unfiltered view from the street level. So this blogger, writing under the name Generation 86, says this in 2014. "We are an expelled generation." Wow. That just hits you, right? It's this deep, profound sense of being completely disillusioned, totally alienated. It's like feeling you're a political refugee in your own home country. And they get even more specific. They write that hate has seeped into the country's political opposition, creating a huge problem. Notice this isn't about some foreign threat. No, this is about the poison of internal division, a toxicity that's ripping society apart from the inside and making any kind of reasonable political conversation pretty much impossible. And that frustration, it's pointed squarely at the people in power. The blogger calls one of the main political parties a bunch of bluffers. You ask them one thing, they give you an answer to something else entirely. What you're seeing here is a total collapse of trust, a complete breakdown in communication between the government and the people it's supposed to serve. The feeling is that the state just isn't listening anymore. And this is where it all clicks. The personal, frustrated voice of this one blogger, it perfectly mirrors the high-level academic data we just saw. This isn't just one person's rant.
It's a real-life, ground-level snapshot of the thesis's big conclusion. The new war, the real battle, was being fought inside these countries, driven by ideology, and it was ripping society apart at the seams.
Okay, so let's pull the camera back out. We've seen the personal story. Now let's look at the full scale of this new era of conflict across the whole region. Remember that Heidelberg Institute data? Well, across the entire region, between 2002 and 2014, it tracked, get this, 548 separate political and ideological conflicts. 548. That number by itself is just staggering, and it tells you everything you need to know about the incredible volatility and the deep, widespread internal battles that were raging.
So here's the bottom line, the big takeaway from the thesis. By making everyone focus on a big, global, external enemy, the war on terror, unintentionally ended up pouring gasoline on all these little fires that were already burning inside these countries. It completely flipped the script on what security meant. The main threat was no longer your neighbor's army, it was the growing conflict between a state and its own society. And the end result? A region that was far more fragile, far more vulnerable than before.
And all of this leaves us with a really tough question, one that the source material puts right on the table. If the modern battlefield isn't a line on a map anymore, but an idea, a belief, a division in people's minds, then how does any nation, whether it's in South Asia or anywhere else in the world, actually find its way back to peace? That's a question for all of us to think about.